All right, welcome to our podcast. My name is Andrew Fisher.
I'm Elliot Cherry.
And today we're going to be doing our Econ video podcast.
It is April 2019. Let's just talk about what we set out to do. And we set out to understand the impact of food and its production process on the environment. And that's a pretty broad topic, so we decided to narrow it down to 6 specific foods and understanding exactly how they impact the environment, what they do. And we chose to focus on 4 things specifically for each food, and that was transportation, production, processing, and externalities. And we took notes on the good, the bad, the ugly, and anything interesting in between.
Next, we want to kind of visit what roles GMO foods play. There's definitely a debate in the health world as to whether or not GMOs are good for your body. But in a world of ever-increasing prices of real estate and land and especially urbanization, there's a limited number of farmers and there's a limited number of agriculture, and GMOs may play an interesting role in that. We're going to look at the role of normal and genetically engineered seeds. And then on another topic, we're also going to talk about different diets, vegan diets, pescatarian diets, vegetarian diets, and just normal carnivorous diets, and kind of which diets are most advantageous to the environment. And
I forgot to mention earlier, but the 6 foods specifically will be, so we chose 3 bad ones and 3 good ones, and the 3 bad ones were red meat, bananas, and then almond/almond milk. And our good ones were potatoes, beans, and fish. We'll get into exactly what is going on with those foods later, but I thought I should just state that now.
And also, as the podcast goes along, I think it'd be interesting for people to kind of think about, what we've been talking about and what are some of the factors that are bad environmentally, and I think piece together why these foods were the 3 that we chose for each respective category.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to close the podcast talking about suggestions to improve your diet. Before we begin our podcast, I'd like to thank the video sponsor, Snapple. Fantastic beverages, also the official juice drink of Major League Baseball. And their financial support has been invaluable to us.
Alright, so where do you actually want to start? You want to start out with the 4 different ways? You want to start with GMO?
So I said we needed a fucking script. Well then, thank you to Snapple. And with that, I think that we're going to jump into the first segment of the podcast and to talk about kind of the 4 different ways that the food industry impacts the environment. So as we were saying, transportation, production, processing, and the externalities. And let's kind of go one by one. So the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are very, very shocked about is that, we talk a lot about locally sourcing food and that being more environmentally sustainable. You think shipping all this food, whether you're shipping food from China, you're shipping food from Mexico, you're shipping avocados, all those are large carbon emission creators because you're moving stuff in bulk, you're moving it in ships, you're moving it by air, you're moving it by truck. But in a careful study by a U.S. diet, scholars found that 83% of emissions occur before leaving the farm gate. I don't know what you think about that. I think that it's kind of fascinating just because, the visual where we see the emissions coming out is we see it coming out of, the exhaust pipes of trucks that Safeway's driving. We see, big freight ships coming into the port of Oakland and bringing all these, different things. And we think to ourselves, like, how inefficient is that? But in reality, if we want to target where food is really impacting the environment, we have to look at the rest of the process. What do you think about that?
Well, are you suggesting that locally grown food could be just as bad as commercially or?
No, I think that based on that statistic, I think that it's interesting that only 17% of the process is part of transportation, and 83% of the process happens on the farm in production and in processing. But we don't see that at all. You think about the farm, and you think about plants, and you think about, they're doing cellular respiration, photosynthesis, and they're turning carbon dioxide into oxygen. That's a little biology there, but like that shouldn't be where we're having our emissions. Our emissions should be in this, ultra commercialized urbanized world where we're transporting everything. The reality, that's not true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a really good point, and that's a good way to open the podcast. In that people think they know what's good and bad for the environment, but this stat just goes to show you, like, we all don't know, and it's really important for us to be able to understand that 83% is just from the production alone.
All right, so I think just to go into some production. So part of the production is, and it varies based on plants that are the poultry and livestock. Those are where kind of we see the biggest impacts on fossil fuel energy. So let's go into this. 1 calorie of fossil fuel energy input returns in excess 80 calories of corn and 2.5 calories of wheat and soybeans. However, the same amount of energy input only returns 0.3 calories of rangeland beef. So if you're growing corn, 1 calorie of fossil fuel energy is getting you 80 calories versus you're losing calories by making beef. It's just so ridiculously inefficient. And on top of that, I'll keep going on that. But what we found in the research is that the impacts is because you're transferring one form of energy, that being the plants, the environment, the ecosystem, and then those animals are eating that, and they're using that energy to keep themselves alive. So that energy is so much of it is lost in just raising the animal and growing this, only to kill it and get is this very small return. That's
a good point. I mean, that's where we find those arguments about how plant-based products are the way to go to be environmentally friendly because they produce the most calories per every calorie input. And that's just a really cool stat that shows why plant-based products are the way to go. I have a question. Did you come across is it only the fact that other animals are eating them and that's why you get so little calories out of it, or is there another distinct difference?
No, I mean just the fact that the cattle, pigs, and chicken, they're ridiculously inefficient with energy usage because they're just using it to live, and that's just a sad reality of the truth. Let's progress. Livestock also release 2 billion tons of manure every year. That's approximately 10 times the human population. And all that is releasing methane gas. So to go into methane gas real quick, and that's kind of the second part about why livestock are so detrimental, is that methane gas is exponentially more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping in heat, and it's so much more powerful of a pollutant than CO2. The reality is these cows are shitting everywhere, all over the farms, and they're just releasing all this methane, and there's no regulation on it there, and this starts to dig into the externalities part. And also why the statistic, when you think about it, makes a lot more sense. These companies are driving these trucks, they're driving these ships, they're going by plane, and they're saving down to the dollar because they own the externality. When they're buying the fuel to drive the planes, when they're buying the fuel for the cars, the trucks, they're paying the drivers, they're paying the ship. They want to reduce the amount of transportation as much as possible because they own that externality. They own that externality of production. They're not going to want to send a truck across the country unless that truck is packed to the brim, because otherwise they're wasting fuel.
Lost profit.
They're lost profit. Versus they can let their cows shit all over the fucking ground and we don't. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Any idea why this isn't talked about as much as CO2 emissions? Obviously, it's probably not as big at this point in time, but 10 times the human population, is it a problem? Do you think this should be a problem we should be focusing on?
No, this is an absolutely insanity. It's also, you have to consider, how are we going to deal with this as a country? We're just going to ban beef all of a sudden? that would be an outrage. Our government, there's so much dependence on business, McDonald's, burgers. It's innately American. Meat is innately American.
Yeah.
And to all of a sudden be like, nope, you can't have that anymore. Like, people go insane. And people's, not only the fact that you're missing meat as a part of your diet, but also the fact that so much business is dependent on the livestock industry that, you risk like economic, there's definitely, the economy's not going to take a hit out of this because it's such a big part of our economy.
I mean, it seems crazy now. I agree with you that. But I'd also argue that the future is probably closer than we think. And, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we stopped all meat eating very soon. And that, I mean, we see how fast we fucking develop as a society. My bad. But it's just like, I would not be surprised in the next 10 years if there were significant changes to the food industry. In red meat, specifically.
All right, so kind of one more interesting fact. North Carolina in 1995, 35 million gallons of pig shit spilled from a containment dam into the river system, killing 10 million fish. Once again, like, is that in North Carolina, is that pig farm going to take that extra? No, the pig shit just spills and, it kills the fish and, it's such a gray area. And I think as a society, if we are going to be more sustainable and we are going to start taking these externalities and starting to move them into the production side of things and making companies accountable for their CO2 emissions through livestock, that's the only way that we're going to be able to really incentivize people to make a change. Yeah. So we dabbled into everything. We dabbled in production. We dabbled into externalities. We did not dabble into processing, and a lot of the processing is just flat out water usage. It takes 600 liters of water to grow 1 kilogram of wheat. It takes 2,500 liters for 1 kilogram of rice, and a staggering 20 to 60,000 liters to produce 1 kilogram of meat. So that's cleaning the meat. That's cleaning the cow. The livestock is such a dirty process, and to refine the beef to a point in which it's edible, you're using all these resources, let alone electricity to run these massive slaughterhouses.
That's almost like an unimaginable amount of water just for some meat.
I mean, let's compare that. Like 600 liters of water to grow a kilogram of wheat compared to 60,000 liters of water for a kilogram of meat. That is 100 times the amount of water to grow wheat.
Mm-hmm. Once again, that's like almost unimaginable. Like I can't imagine. Obviously, it's a statistic. It's true. I just can't even imagine what that looks like and where all that water is coming from. Like, how do they use that much water to do that?
And we talked about this also in environmental econ, but the fact that water is ridiculously underpriced in America, mm-hmm. and it is what has allowed us to do these very resource-intensive processes where we're refining beef, and it's because it's underpriced. It wouldn't be sustainable for us to be eating this much beef if we actually price water at its true value. And I'm not saying that I know that true value, but it's beyond evident that water is underpriced.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point as well.
So yeah, the processing is water and electricity intensive. The transportation, that's CO2. But the production of stuff with both the methane release and also feeding the animals, cleaning up the animals when they die, keeping the farm clean, that's in crazy. And then also just the fact that, we're not taking on the externalities of just flat out waste coming from animals.
Yeah.
Those are the biggest ways that we found that the food industry impacts the environment. That will conclude section 1 of this podcast. May I mention that this kiwi strawberry Snapple is absolutely delicious. We'll be right back, moving into section 2 and talking about what roles GMO foods play.
Welcome back.
Cheers.
Section 2, GMOs. Want to start off?
Yeah, let's dive right into it. As the NRC report documents, the available evidence indicates that current GE soybean, cotton, and corn variants have genetically improved the economic and environmental conditions on farms that adopted them compared to using conventional, non-genetically engineered cropping methods. The sustainable but not universal benefits of stem mainly from using lower cost, more flexible, and more environmentally based pesticides than complement either no tillage or conservation tillage practices. All right, so that was a lot of stuff. What does that mean? And that being that, in an environment with pests and maximizing your dollar in an especially competitive industry such as farming, and people talk about, there's a huge debate in the country about how short-handed, how short of stick farmers get from companies. They're expected to meet demands, and if they fall short of that, they lose their land. A lot of times, farmers don't own the land that they're working on, and they're kind of, bought into this idea that I have the privilege to work on this land, and eventually, by working for this company, I'm gonna be able to own it. And you're working for the land so that you can keep working on the land. It's kind of insane. But anyways, that's just talking about how competitive the thing is. So it's kind of inevitable that to feed such an enormous population with such a high calorie need and also different types of calories, we need to, there has to be some form of pesticides for the majority of the U.S. population. As much as we would like to say eat organic, it is just simply not feasible for everybody to pay. We can get into that a little bit later. There's an interesting statistic about what we're spending on food, but that's a fascinating statistic. If you're genetically engineering seeds, those seeds are more resilient to the pests that could be, hurting the crops. They're more resilient to water changes. They're more resilient to just about everything because they're genetically engineered. And so you don't need to spray your field with pesticides and then let that pesticide run off into the river and then pollute the fish. You don't need to, you don't need to till. You don't need to monocrop as much because the nutrient usage is better. All of these things are, as much as we wouldn't like to have, manipulating biology. If we manipulate biology, we don't have to go into these other practices that we're currently using. What do you think about that?
I mean, it sounds great to me, and I don't know if you came across any examples where it was a problem. Like, obviously, editing biology, we don't know what could happen. It's messing with nature, and I was just wondering, did we come across anything that was against that?
Well, there's definitely statistics as well as the impact on kids. There's the impact on adults. I think that people talk about, when you're at a younger age, you're more susceptible to the chemicals in these in this food, and not chemicals, but having a genetically engineered seed, and that could hurt you more. So maybe when you're younger, stay away from that. But as you get older, this is all science that you and I don't understand. But people are saying that as you get older, you are more resilient to using these seeds, and therefore, it's probably the right call for the majority of people. Not necessarily everybody, but if we're talking about feeding a large population, these genetically engineered crops are just so much stronger.
Yeah, and I'd also argue evolution. I'm sure it might not be good for us now, but evolution's gonna find its way.
All right, so let's talk about the way the genetically engineered crops. They produce their own insecticide, reducing crop losses to insect damage, and are termed insect-resistant crops. The second type of genetically engineered seed is to resist particular herbicides that can be used to kill many types of weeds without harming the crops, and are termed herbicide-resistant. So it's pretty insane that we can make these seeds so much stronger and then not have to spray the pesticides all over. And I think that I talked about this a couple minutes ago, but interesting statistic on what we are spending on food. I will pull that up. In the 1900s, half of working classes Americans' household income went to purchase food. Half of an American's income went to purchase food. As industrial methods transformed U.S. agriculture, prices dropped. In 1950, the national average was 22%. By 1998, food accounted for just 7% of an average American household disposable income. We are paying 43% less of our income to food. You know, we talk about there's three things necessary for life: food, water, and shelter. And only 7% of our income is going towards putting what's in our body. And that has direct impacts that are very short term, as well as increasing your health and your performance and your energy levels, but also, you know, long term, you know, increasing your risk for cancer, increasing liver damage risk. And that's kind of a a counter argument is like, you know, we say like, oh, in order to feed the American population at the current rate, and that current rate's important, we'll get into a little specific, we have to make food this cheap, and therefore to make it this cheap, we need to take these risks, that being spraying crops with pesticides, making genetically engineered seeds. But that rate is the fact that we're so used, you know, we've become accustomed to paying so little for food. Food is, you know, in many ways, 100 years ago, it seems much more of a privilege. You know, the saying, you know, you're working to put food on the table, like, didn't come from nowhere. Like, so the counter to that is saying, you know, should we as a society be prioritizing spending more on food? What do you think?
I mean, it seems as if that's just the natural flow of things, and that's just how the world has made it.
It's a market set price.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going for. And that companies are going to find ways to seek a profit. They're going to find ways to make it faster, make it more efficient, and it's going to make it cheaper and all.
Do you not find 7%, and that was 1998.
Wasn't it 17 or it was 7?
No, 7% of your American income, the middle class. And that was 20 years ago, so I'm sure it's probably closer to 5.
Yeah.
5 or 4. Is that too little?
Yeah, it's 5%. It's 5 to 7% kind of scares me. Even looking away from the past, it doesn't matter what we spent 100 years ago because life was much different back then.
Sure.
But even 5 to 7% now kind of scares me in that that's what we live on. That's our energy source, and if that's all we're spending on that, it's like, I think we might be doing something wrong in that we might not be feeding ourselves properly. That's why we get that cheap food. We get McDonald's, we get cancer, and we get those problems.
Yeah, and it's not linear like that. Like, yeah, you might be saving a couple bucks by buying a GMO food or genetically engineered seed food during one day, but in 20 years, if you rack up a $200,000 medical bill, that entire thing goes to waste. Like, your dollar that you saved then doesn't matter anymore because now you're in a total, like, shithole for that sake, like, and you can't get out of it. And had you just increased it just a little bit, you could have fed yourself in a little bit better. A little bit better ingredients. You could be supporting a more sustainable, not sustainable because arguably the genetically engineered seed is more sustainable, but, you know, a more ethical business, and that being, you know, organic, natural crops. And also the organic completely outmatches genetically engineered, and definitely outmatches GMO as well as the externalities. You know, the genetically engineered seeds and the GMO style of growing things, spraying pesticides, insecticides, tillage, all that is, you know, not comparable to organic food because organic food doesn't contaminate the environment it uses.
Yeah.
One thing I was also reading is that, you know, it takes 10 to 15 years after if it even is salvageable to convert a commercially used pesticide GMO field to an organic field. It's a ridiculously strenuous process, and we're basically wasting land. We're damaging it as we grow these genetically modified foods. But yeah,
so that's another drawback of GMOs.
Yeah, I mean, we're all playing this short-term game where trying to spend the minimal amount of food on possible, make it as efficient as possible in the smallest amount of space, and just get people the bare minimum amount of nutrients they need. And we're not thinking about these long-term externalities: containment of field, containment of rivers, containment of water, health, and also business and ethical practices.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you sorry, just to make sure, you were saying that it's very difficult to change an organic field into a GMO field.
No, vice versa. A GMO field into an organic field, because the field is already so contaminated with those pesticides and insecticides, and those have to wash out over time. So what you have to do is you have to grow 10 to 15 years organic food, but the field isn't registered as organic. So you're growing organic food organically and paying the premium of growing organic food, but you're not getting the return on investment because your food is still marketed as GMO until those 10 to 15 years pass when the field is now non-GMO.
And
so that transition itself is impossible. I think that the main point that we want to get here is that you know we have to decide as a society what we're going to do, and if we want to take these short-term gains and potentially risk some very detrimental long-term consequences. And also whether or not we're fine eating genetically engineered seed. I don't think that there is a role for GMOs, just these these really nasty chemicals and probably ill and immoral business practices, as well as growing the food. I think that in the short term it's unsustainable, in the long term it's unsustainable, but maybe genetically engineering our seeds might be the call as we kind of try to transition out of throwing pesticides in our field, because we have to make something happen. Yeah. I think that there is a place for the genetically engineered seeds, but the GMO practices of spraying your fields and putting the pesticides and insecticides all over and that uncontaminated waste, there's really no place for it. Elliot, this kiwi strawberry Snapple sure is delicious. Let's move into section 3, our final section of the podcast, and we're going to start to talk about different types of diets. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but it'll be interesting.
Vegan diet? Did you actually research that?
Yes.
Where is it?
We're going to go to our final section. We're going to try to go very, very quickly, and then we're going to go over these foods and get you out of here. All right, so our final section is on diets, and I think that we can already kind of go into this, but the fact that if the way that you look at it, we look at the production, the fact that the calorie translation between plant foods, as high as 81 calorie of fuel to 80 calories of corn, compared to 1 calorie of fuel to 0.3 calories of meat, the discrepancy between plant foods and livestock, the transition, it's just, we have to start asking ourselves, is it worth it to keep eating these livestock? And that's the reason that, the vegan diet has become so popular, because it not only are you not eating the animals.
One of the reasons it's becoming popular.
One of the reasons it's becoming popular, the other obviously being a moral and ethical dilemma, but, we're not here to debate that, we're here to debate the environment. But the main point being that the vegan diet also doesn't use animal-based products. I mean, eggs, dairy products, all those, and those are equally, eggs and dairy-based products are, you have to still grow the cow. Yes, it's a little bit more environmentally sustainable because you're getting more nutrients over time. You can milk a cow hundreds of times, but you can't kill a cow. You only kill a cow once. So you're getting still a little bit more out of that, but it's still not even in the realm of environmental sustainability as our plant-based foods. We would be doing a disservice to all carnivores and mentally sane people out there who are eating meat like a normal person, and
you get to keep your meat.
And not
3% decrease.
Chill out. We would be doing this disservice without saying the blatantly obvious fact that plant-based foods just do not provide the protein that you get out of animals. If we go straight to plant-based foods, there's scientific correlation with an increase in allergies, There's also scientific correlation with increased allergies and other health-related issues with genetically modified, but you're taking out a part of our diet that is so, innately part of our biological development as a human species, and you're taking out protein. And you can see, like, you look at a vegan and they're freaking small. And one, we don't want to be small, and two, we also we don't want to be unhealthy. And there's a balance between, the people that are eating red meat every single day and are going to get a liver problem when they're 55, and the 22-year-old, social liver out of college who thinks they're fantastic for eating just plant-based. All right. So as this madness begins to close, we would like to talk about the 3 foods that are healthy and the 3 foods that are not good. And Elliot's going to jump into that right now.
All right, to start it off with the bad foods. We got red meat, whether surprising or not to you. It's high in saturated fat and cholesterol, so it's not just bad for you, but it's gonna have a huge environmental externality in that the pollution through fossil fuel usage, the animal methane, the effluent waste, and obviously the water and land consumption that we already talked about earlier. So yeah, it's not just bad for you, and it's also bad for the environment. So
next,
almonds and almond milk. So obviously we've heard the rise of almond milk in the last 10 years, but it's actually it's
that and avocado toast.
That not avocado toast. It requires 10x like the water required for regular milk, which is just ridiculous. And it's mostly also grown in drought-ridden California, which is also not good. So just almond milk compared to regular milk is just 10 times worse. And it's growing popularity, and I'd love to see where it is in 10 years. And then finally we have bananas, which is rather surprising. I was surprised when I saw this one. And it's so bad for the environment because of the deforestation that causes it. And that's basically just because of the demand of bananas across our whole globe. And what we have to cut down, the land we have to use. We're going to be cutting down a bunch of trees in the process, and that's no good for the environment. And then additionally, the transportation of bananas is a lot worse than other foods in that we're going to be flying bananas halfway across the globe, and that's just a lot of fossil fuels. And even though we talked about how production is a majority of it, there's still a key in transportation, and bananas require a lot.
We're exporting those from much farther places in the middle of Kansas. As we close, these were not the 3 worst possible foods on a scientific quantitative measurements. We chose these by the fact that they kind of tackled 3 different parts, the bananas being mainly a transportation and a land problem, the almonds being extremely water intensive, avocados as well, that was another high contender, and then the red meat being part of that general trend of how detrimental livestock can be.
Yep. Alright, on to the good ones. We're going to start with potatoes. So it's an all-around eco-winner in that it's only going to require a moderate amount of water and fertilizer. And like we were talking about GMOs earlier and Gs, the pest control kind of comes naturally to potatoes, and they produce compounds that already ward off insects and disease, so we don't have to worry about that. The crop yield's relatively high, pretty straightforward. It's just a staple product, really easy to grow. They can last a while on the shelf, and that's a really good thing.
We're one of the highest, if not the highest, food waste producer. We don't take it as seriously, and because we're not dependent on it, and we're tremendously privileged in this country. But let's continue on to beans.
All right, so it's a vegetable protein, and it's an important step in mapping out your sustainable lifestyle. So they also have a very long shelf life as well, and obviously we already talked about less food waste, better organic living. Beans are all around good eco winner.
And that water to fuel that the water usage and also the usage of fossil fuels is, you're gaining calories. You're in the positive there.
Yeah.
And also the protein, and you talk about the complaint being that you can't get protein from plants, and beans is a good way to kind of counter that.
Yeah, double-edged sword, beans. Lastly, we got fish. So not only is it going to be good for you, it's going to be good for the environment in that it's high protein, low fat food, provides a wide range of health benefits in that it's lower in fat than any other animal protein, and it's got those omega-3 fatty acids, which I'm sure we've all heard of at one point. And
they don't taste good, but...
And finally, we got a study that showed meat eaters contribute more greenhouse gases than fish eaters, and fish eaters contribute only slightly more than vegetarians to greenhouse gases. So pretty much slightly better. So basically just as good for the environment as vegan eating is fish eating, which is really cool.
Cool. With that, our podcast kind of comes to a wrap. I think one thing we're to put this on the board. There's an interesting poster that 10 ways to green your food, and you'll see this on your screen. Make it local, make it vegetarian. If you eat beef, grass meat, make it organic. Chicken, eggs, eating more fish, making it fresh, making it vegan, making it slow, sustainable. You look at this list of what you have to do, and there's part of it that's approachable for Americans, but it's also extremely demanding. And I think that if we just took we're gonna eat those 3 good foods, and we're gonna become little communists and eat potatoes, straight beans, what are we saying to ourselves as a society? And I think that we're gonna have to kind of a middle as we move towards an appropriate transition. This podcast was not made to make people feel bad about themselves, but I think to educate on some solutions.
Knowledge.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge.
You got anything else on your end, Elliot?
Last, just going off what you said, I think the best way to go about it is just to provide the knowledge. Make a source where we can verify things, we can all agree upon something, and we can let the people make the choice from there, but make sure we provide the knowledge to those people, and they're not just ignorant about it.
All right. It's Andrew Fisher signing out. God bless Snapple.
See you later.